watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following, and by viewers like you.
I'm Mark Golub, and one might say that ever since the president's speech in Cairo, there has been a growing division within American Jewry relating to their comfort or discomfort with the president as he represents the administration policy vis-a-vis Israel. And the issues have become more and more exacerbated over time, and there has been a greater and greater feeling among many in the Jewish community, including many mainstream Jewish leaders, that U.S. policy is in some way changing vis-a-vis Israel and distancing America from Israel in ways that have not occurred for many, many, many years. And we've seen of late a number of American Jewish leaders actually publish open letters to the president trying to express to him the concern of American Jewry. Well, it turns out that both on April 20th and on May 14th, two virtually secret meetings were being held at the White House with a number of major administration leaders, such as Rahm Emanuel, Dennis Ross, who of course leads the Iranian desk, Dan Shapiro, the Deputy National Security Advisor, who deals with policies affecting Israel and its neighbors, Susan Scher, who is the Chief White House Liaison to the Jewish community, and Daniel Boren, who is a special assistant to Vice President Joe Biden. And these individuals from the administration met with 15 specific rabbis who represent each movement on the American Jewish scene: Orthodox, Conservative, Reform. They are all associated with major congregations in America, so they represent large constituencies. They serve major Jewish congregations. And these 15 rabbis came together twice with administration officials to express, my understanding is, their concern where the administration is going vis-a-vis Israel. And the administration wanted in some way to put the minds of these 15 rabbis at ease. And now there has been a report of these two meetings, and we are very pleased to have on our phones right now, first from Congregation Agudas Achim in Alexandria, Virginia, conservative Rabbi Jack Moline, who you've already seen on Shalom TV, a dear friend of mine, and the individual who is credited as having orchestrated this meeting between the White House and the 15 selected rabbis. And we also have on our phones Rabbi Efrem Goldberg, an Orthodox rabbi from Boca Raton Synagogue in Boca Raton, Florida. And he was one of the other 15 rabbis present at these two meetings. And first, Jack and Efrem, thank you for taking the time to share some thoughts with us.
It's a pleasure.
So I want to begin, Jack. I'm looking first for some confirmation. The story goes that you are friends with Rahm Emanuel, and that after the difficulties the president had with Prime Minister Netanyahu after AIPAC, you reached out to Rahm Emanuel and thought it was very important for the White House to meet with American rabbis and to somehow clarify the relationship between the U.S. and Israel. Is that report accurate?
Not exactly, Mark. I have indeed known Rahm for quite a number of years. He was a part of my congregation during his years in the Clinton White House. When he moved back to Chicago, he was not in Washington often enough to be considered a part of the community. But I was glad to continue to be a resource to him as a rabbi, as a pastor, whatever you'd want to call it, when he came back to take on these responsibilities for President Obama. We talk with some frequency. I mean, it's certainly not a daily thing. And we talk about the issues of the day. And it was Rahm who expressed some concern about what I was hearing in the Jewish community, and I shared with him very honestly that I was concerned that people who had previously been supportive of the president and trusted him on matters of Israel were now having doubts because they were not hearing from the administration the things that reassured them that their trust in the president was justified. It was actually Rahm's suggestion to get a group of rabbis together and bring them into the White House to have this discussion. And he was interested in doing this on a very substantive and, I don't want to use the word confidential, but not a public basis.
I understand.
He wanted to be able to have this conversation without the press parsing every word that was being exchanged.
Okay. Jack, how were the 15 or the 14 other rabbis chosen?
I was very determined to make sure that we had a geographic and religious diversity represented in the group, men and women, people of different ages, and people who came from somewhat different political perspectives as well. We were not looking for anybody who was a cheerleader for the president, and we were not looking for anyone who has staked a reputation on being a detractor of the president. We wanted people who we thought would be open-minded and honest brokers.
Can you tell me, Jack, did the White House veto anybody?
The White House had no idea who was coming until I submitted a list.
Okay, so you put this together after Rahm Emanuel sort of opened the door for you.
Yes.
Okay, I want to read to both you and Efrem the way the meeting was described, and then you tell me whether this is accurate. The Obama administration has, quote, screwed up the messaging about its support for Israel over the last 14 months, and it will take, quote, more than 1 month to make up for those 14 months. White House Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel said Thursday to a group of rabbis called together for a meeting in the White House. To what extent did Rahm Emanuel basically say the American administration has screwed up on its messaging about Israel? Jack?
Mark, I will tell you that Rahm acknowledged that there were shortcomings in the way the administration had communicated its existing policies. But the use of that report of what he said as the headline for the meeting or the defining moment of the meeting is completely irresponsible. The discussion of messaging, though it wasn't absent from the meeting, was a small part of the total of 3 hours that we spent with senior administration officials over the course of 2 meetings. Mm-hmm. So it was irresponsible for that headline to appear in a major English language Jewish paper that's not published in the United States. And it was irresponsible for other groups to pick it up because that story contains no quotations from Rabbi Goldberg, Rabbi Moline, or any of the other 13 rabbis who were there.
That is correct. By the way, it didn't even mention which other 14 rabbis were there. Efrem, if you had to write a headline that in some way expressed the sense of the meeting, what would the headline be? Or in general, how would you express what those meetings were about?
Well, firstly, Mark, thanks for the opportunity to talk to you. It was heartening that the administration is making an outreach effort to hear on the grassroots level the Jewish community's reaction and response to the U.S.-Israel relationship now. And I feel privileged, and it was a privilege to have the opportunity to really dialogue. And it was not a monologue. We were not listening to them. They really did come to hear us. We felt heard. And the opportunity to voice some concerns and even some criticisms on what is happening was very refreshing and heartening. And their outreach effort is something that went on for more than once as a publicity stunt, but really continued through these 2 meetings, and we hope will continue in the form of a conversation. There were the different rabbis in the room have different approaches and political perspectives before they came in, and certainly that influenced the prism through which they interpreted everything we were being told. It's good to know, and we're hopeful and cautiously optimistic about the administration's commitment to improve their messaging and their outreach and their embracement and love of both Israel and the pro-Israel community. But there remain some real policy issues that also we hope to see some production and some change on vis-a-vis sanctions with Iran and perhaps the tone towards Israel in terms of its pressure with negotiations. But the meeting as a whole was highly productive. It was a real opportunity to both feel heard and to hear I know that I gained a lot of new information, and there was knowledge that was reassuring to me, and at the same time to continue to have some concerns, but have the opportunity to voice them.
Okay, and I want to follow up on that in one moment, but Efrem, if somebody described this meeting in part as the administration's leaders coming to the Jewish community through the 15 rabbis present to apologize for the way in which the administration has been perceived vis-a-vis Israel, would that be accurate? Was there any sense of, gentlemen and ladies, we've really made a mistake here and we apologize?
I think the term apology would be an inaccurate description. It was less a question of an apology than it was a clarification and a renewed effort to improve on the messaging. It wasn't so much as retrospective, the meeting, as it was prospective. We weren't interested in reviewing history as much as being able to dialogue about where we go from here. How can we get things on the right track? How can we improve the perceived relationship with the leadership of Israel? And how do we deal with the very real policy issues, as I said, of Iran and its threat, of Israel and its neighbors, and so on. So it wasn't so much to review history and apologize as it was to renew efforts to move forward, and I think that was a healthy angle of the conversation.
Okay, Jack, I want you to know that I am somewhat disappointed. I like the way it was written better than what the two of you are describing, so I want to push one more time. You and Rahm Emanuel have a discussion right after the flap over the way Netanyahu was treated when he was at the White House. And I don't know the extent to which it's literally as bad as it was portrayed. I know that the Prime Minister has tried to downplay it, but other diplomats who I respect, both Israeli and American, have said that the way that the Prime Minister was treated by the President at the White House was absolutely unheard of in diplomatic circles. And I was assuming that somehow it had reached a level where Jack Moline and maybe Rahm Emanuel felt something had to be done within the context of the White House-Jewish relationship, where rabbis would come together and there would be some sense from the administration of, you know, we may have communicated poorly. We don't mean to give the impression we're giving. And so I don't know if anybody actually said, we are sorry. But I did feel that the reports I have been reading, and which other Jews are reading, and you know, both of you now have talked about that in some sense they were communicating an element of reality to these meetings. There was some feeling from within administration leaders that they had not done a good job and had either misled or unintentionally created an impression that they were sorry about. So I'm asking you again, Jack, okay, is there no sense here that somebody said to you guys and ladies, I don't, again, you said there was both men and women rabbis present, you know, we didn't do as good a job as we should have?
Well, Mark, let me sort of back up to the beginning of your question there. The conversation I had with Rahm did not reference the incident of Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit to the White House at all. And I really can't go into more detail about the circumstances of that conversation because it was in an informal and very personal setting. It was not something that's for general publication.
Okay. But you do understand how extraordinary it is that the White House would, and I appreciate what you said before, both of you, that this was not supposed to be a public display, but the administration brings 15 rabbis that you choose from all over America to sit at the White House with Rahm Emanuel and Dennis Ross and Susan Scheer. This is not small. And one of the things that I also want you to talk about at one point is, how come this doesn't make the front page of the New York Times? How come we don't hear about this on CNN? Many people are hearing this for the first time on Shalom TV. So anyway, my point is there is something big here.
Subscribe to Shalom TV. So, Mark, you're absolutely right. This was an extraordinary and by many measures unprecedented set of meetings that is an indication that the White House understood that some outreach to the Jewish community was necessary. What I don't want to fall into the trap of doing here is what got us into this situation to begin with, which is people taking a look at isolated events in the relationship between the White House and the Jewish community, the White House and the State of Israel, and extrapolating based on a narrative they would like to hear what's going on. I think that is what has gotten us into all of this lather that is driving a wedge in the American Jewish community on the question of Israel that is not healthy for the state of Israel. And that the purpose of this meeting, from both the rabbi's point of view and the White House's point of view, was to get some facts on the ground straight, to understand what the policies have been and what direction they're going in, and to open channels of communication with trusted leaders of American congregations about what the policies and intentions of the administration are. And I credit Rahm with picking up on the tension that existed in the community and attempting to alleviate it, and I credit my 14 colleagues who were in that room, in the Roosevelt Room of the White House, feet away from the Oval Office, from being forthright and direct and not pulling any punches, and raising every issue that has been circulated in emails that are coming from spurious sources, including the people who say they know what went on at the White House that night. I've talked to two people who were there, and the reports you're referring to bear no relationship to reality.
Okay. I'll ask it a different way. Did the meetings at all make you feel better, Jack, about the relationship between the American administration and Israel?
About the relationship between the American administration and Israel. I didn't feel too badly about the relationship between the United States administration and Israel, maybe because I've had some of these policy discussions with people who are in government.
Okay, and I know, by the way, you tend to be liberal in your outlook.
I do.
And I know, obviously, you are a supporter of Barack Obama, but at the same time, you wouldn't have wanted to make this effort if something weren't bothering you.
Well,
and so I'm asking you,
I have
whatever
a
was
congregation of Republicans and Democrats, of liberals and conservatives, and my reassurances to them, based on my own political leanings, were inadequate. It didn't have anything to do with, and it shouldn't have anything to do with, what they think about the administration. So my expression to Rahm of my concern, both from what I've heard in my congregation and from the conversations I've had with colleagues, was that there was a step missing here. That what I was finding out by talking to the people who walk the sidewalks in Washington, because everybody works for the government here, was not being communicated well outside the Beltway. And I think Efrem can tell you that's very much the impression that the White House got.
Right, yes.
That what Dennis Ross called the subterranean issues, that are the foundational issues for Israel, are not on the front page of the New York Times, as you said. What's being reported is that there was yelling and screaming about apartment complexes in the eastern part of Jerusalem.
Okay, Efrem, I want to hit the exact same question for you. Did your meeting with the White House make you any more comfortable with the administration's relationship with the State of Israel? And I believe, Efrem, you are more on the right. Am I correct than Jack would be?
You are correct.
Okay. Did you go in with certain concerns which in some way were addressed? And then you can tell me if they were addressed successfully or not.
I went in with a lot of concerns. Arguably, among all those who attended, I had the most back and forth with our hosts and pressed them on issues. And I can say that I went in with anxieties and with concerns, and I left with anxieties and concerns, but I gained a tremendous respect for the administration's genuine commitment to Israel, and left with a commitment to continue to debate the policies and the issues, but not to challenge the authenticity of their commitment to Israel and its security.
Okay, but that's a very important distinction. I have seen you written about, Efrem, where it quotes you as saying you appreciate the passion of the administration when it comes to Israel. You're not sure you agree with their strategy. Is that sort of accurate?
That's very accurate. And the 2 points that I made to my congregation this past weekend were that there are legitimate concerns that I personally have, and many of my friends in the community where I live in Palm Beach County have, about the policies and about the approaches and about the pressures that they're putting on Israel, and those concerns remain. But as much as we are committed to the message and delivering it to the White House, if we were disappointed with their messaging, we should reflect on our own, and that we have to only debate policies and not people. We have to focus on issues and not innuendo, and that when we lower ourselves to disseminate sensational information and emails that are full of inaccuracies and distortions because, as Jack alluded to, they support a narrative, then we've simply removed ourselves from a productive conversation. And if we want to be able to participate and contribute to a critical dialogue on Israel and the U.S. relationship with Israel, then we have to make the challenges about the policies and not about the people.
So I want to react to you again. I talk to the average Jewish community all the time. I hear my own congregants speak because of Shalom. Shalom TV, I'm hearing people all the time. And I want to tell you what I believe they're going to hear from the two of you right now, and you see if this is the message you mean to convey. So the 15 rabbis get together in a room with the administration, and nobody says to anybody, we screwed up. Nobody says to anybody, do you really want to make such an issue over the housing in Ramat Shlomo? Nobody says to them, what's going on between the president and Netanyahu? Nobody is saying, how come there hasn't been a stronger U.S. effort to impose sanctions on Iran? And what about the nuclear threat of Iran? And nobody at the administration said to you, we're terribly sorry, we miscommunicated. Here's what we're doing, and we want you to feel better about it. There had to be something really substantive that the administration wanted to communicate to 15 rabbis who would then go back into their communities and not keep it a secret. Nothing in that meeting, Jack, and nothing in that meeting, Efrem, should now be secretive. I've got the two of you here where you're talking to all of America, let alone American Jewry, all of America here, where you can tell us what the administration is trying to say about its own relationship to Israel, and I don't hear anything concrete coming out of it. Jack, what do you say?
Well, I'll say first of all that I took the privilege of the first question at our first meeting. And what I said to Ambassador Ross, and Mr. Emanuel walked in as he was answering the question, I said, the email that's circulating right now is there's something wrong with a man who cares more about a Jew building an apartment in East Jerusalem than a Muslim building a nuclear weapon in Tehran. Right? And how do you respond to that? So
good for you.
Well, Mark, I'm just saying, this is the nature of what we as rabbis presented to the administration's top advisors on these matters.
Okay, and what did they say to you, Jack?
Ambassador Ross took exception to the characterization of the president's attitudes, and there was. I'm trying not to be evasive here, Mark. I'm trying to avoid misreporting something that is going to be parsed by people who have one of these narratives that they're looking to support. There was an objection to the notion that that's what happened, although there was an understanding of how it could be perceived that way. I think that's probably the best way to put it. Nobody was there offering any apologies because that is indeed front-page news on the New York Times, and it wasn't their purpose in bringing us in. But when we asked about Iran, when we asked about the sanctions in Iran, if you'd like a 5-minute discourse on what they said, I can give it to you.
Just give me the bottom. What's the bottom line?
The bottom line is that Congress wants the United States to act unilaterally, and the administration is persuaded that if they do not have international cooperation, including with Russia and China, that the rest of the world is going to throw up their hands and say, this is the United States handling it, and we don't have to worry about Iran at all. And the president wants an international coalition in the United Nations to validate sanctions before the United States takes unilateral action.
Okay.
That's the policy approach.
Okay. I want to ask either you or Efrem this question, because if I had been one of those 15 rabbis, I would have pointed out to the Rahm Emanuels and the Dennis Rosses and the Susan Schurs who were in the room that no less than an Abe Foxman and then a Ronald Lauder, who's the president of the World Jewish Congress, goes public in an ad in the New York Times saying, in essence, Mr. President, you don't get it. It's not about Israeli settlements that's the obstacle to peace in the Middle East. And every time you put that as the front issue, you are misleading Americans and you're making it more difficult for Israelis vis-a-vis Palestinians. The real issue that the American administration should be dealing with is the inability of the Arab world to recognize the legitimate right of the State of Israel to exist? And is there going to be any change in the message of the American administration? Now, did anybody, Efrem, say that to anybody at these two meetings?
Yes, absolutely. I did. And again,
And
I want to
very
be clear,
well, I might add.
Very
Mark,
well.
I want to be clear to you and to your listeners that while it wasn't about remorse and apology, of course they invited us there because there's an acknowledgement that what they conceive as their commitment to Israel is not being filtered down to the regular pro-Israel Jewish community.
And that was something you felt, but you felt that too before this meeting, Efrem.
Of course, and that was an acknowledgement articulated in the meeting, but it was not the focus or the purpose of the mandate of the meeting. The purpose of the meeting was a form of outreach to begin a dialogue to talk about current policies and future issues that will come up, to help us better understand where the administration's coming from, and for us to help the administration understand how that's playing out in the community at large and where that's getting through and where it's not. And I can tell you that they met resistance on a number of issues. It was polite, it was courteous, it was respectful, but it was resistance on questions like you just mentioned. Personally, I asked Ambassador Ross, as a person who was an architect of Oslo and who's been at this attempt towards negotiations for many years, why he thinks this attempt will be different from those before. And while previous attempts like Oslo yielded an intifada and the withdrawal from Gaza yielded 10,000 rockets, why this attempt won't yield something that we regret. And there were questions such as that posed by me and by my colleagues, and there was a healthy back and forth. Some of it, for me, informative and reassuring, some of it not entirely relieving the doubt and the anxiety, but it was a healthy conversation on policy, which is how these issues should be handled.
Very good.
Rather than a protest for the sake of protest.
I understand. Okay, give me one example of where your fears were allayed, and give me an example where fears of yours were not allayed.
Okay, the administration shared with us the level of defense sharing currently taking place with Israel, talked about the recent meeting of Defense Minister Ehud Barak at the White House and his own statements following, and shared the frequency and the depth of sharing of intelligence information and of military supplies, and some of it at an all-time high. And that is the kind of thing that doesn't make headlines, but in the end of the day, for those committed to Israel's security, that information is reassuring. The recent, last week, just the day before we had been there, the administration asking Congress for $205 million to support the iron...
Yes, the shield.
Iron Dome.
Iron Shield.
Right.
Iron Dome.
The great rocket defense. That was reassuring to hear, and to hear some information that frankly was off the record that I don't want to repeat, but that at least is reassuring to know that there is a commitment to the defense. That would be the subterranean information that Ambassador Ross referred to. It's more of the public policy issues, some of the silence on Iran and elsewhere that the community is waiting to hear in order to be able to feel a sense of trust. And like I say, some of my colleagues were much more reassured because their policies are aligned with the administration's before they came in. Others are less, but it was a healthy dialogue, I feel.
Efrem, why should anything be off the record?
I think there's the privilege in any conversation to have information off the record, and I don't think it should be different here. And frankly, it gave me greater confidence in the meeting to know that there was now and then, very infrequently, but a comment off the record made the whole experience much more genuine rather than something which was as a PR stunt.
Okay, so there were some things that only you can know, but your congregants can't know.
We're not talking about major intelligence information. We're talking about a reference to a conversation or the like, but I think in a relationship that's being developed, which if it's a genuine outreach effort by the administration to these rabbis, in a relationship, there is going to be information off the record, and that supports the depth of a relationship and the meaning in a relationship.
I don't know that that's true. I'm going to tell you.
I'll give you an example.
Wait. I just want to. I'll come in a second, Jack. Here's the danger, Efrem. You're being co-opted. You're being co-opted by being brought to the White House. You and 14 others are made very special. Incidentally, I think Jack did a terrific job. Jack, you did a magnificent job in terms of getting a cross-section, although one would have to ask why the administration wouldn't be wanting to sit in this context with an Eric Yaffe and a Julie Schoenfeld and some of the people who have not only a congregational constituency, but a national constituency. But set that aside, it's very seductive to be one of 15 rabbis brought to the White House to get confidential, off-the-record information.
Mark,
And Efrem, that's why it doesn't smell good when a rabbi says, we had an open meeting, we met with the administration, but I can't tell you what they said to me.
No, Mark, nobody told you we can't tell you. And
You said it's off the record.
No. I said there was a comment here or there off the record. If you'd like, we can have a lengthy conversation about their approach to Iran sanctions, as Jack alluded to, or their approach to the negotiations and how they will unfold, or their approach to other issues that we went back and forth on, 99% of it on the record. The point that I'm making, and I think my colleagues would all tell you, I certainly was not co-opted, and I don't think any of them. We were not caught sitting in the headlights with the celebrity of the moment. We were not seduced by being feet from the Oval Office, and we were not simply appreciative of this opportunity.
Okay.
Man by man and woman to woman, we went around the table and voiced legitimate and strong concerns, and in cases had strong back and forth that I believe and I hope left a real impression. And my congregants to whom I spoke this past weekend would tell you that I wasn't co-opted when I shared that I remain anxious and concerned about Israel's future. Had I been co-opted, I would come home and share a message that says everything is okay, it's all wonderful, and we held hands and sang Kumbaya, and the administration is all for Israel. I believe that there is a genuine commitment to Israel. I believe our hosts expressed and reflected a true commitment to Israel and its security. I happen to have a radically different and fundamentally different approach than they. But the key is to remain, to object to their policies and not to the people and to the narrative.
I agree. Jack?
Mark, I take very little credit for what I did. I was in the right place at the right time. But the one thing I will take absolute credit for is that the emails that I sent to the colleagues who were coming to these meetings, every one of them said, do not be blown away by the fact that we're in the White House. Mm-hmm. This is an opportunity to speak truth to power. I don't care what your position is as long as you are direct in expressing it and taking advantage of this unique opportunity. So that was our default position going in, that we were just all going to have to get over the fact that we were in the White House. Was it cool? Of course it's cool to be in the White House.
Sure.
But did it affect our conversation? Not for a minute.
Okay. I want to wrap up this way, and Efrem, I'm going to begin with you. What I said at the top of this show was there has been within the Jewish community almost a division of philosophy vis-a-vis the Obama administration. Many American Jews, look, almost 80% of American Jewry voted for Barack Obama. There was an enthusiasm about him in terms of what he represents for the United States of America. And here we have the first African-American president who is eloquent in his speech, who is also idealistic and is able to, in some way, inspire America in ways that I have not seen since Jack Kennedy. And all that is wonderful. And at the same time, there are those in the Jewish community who feel that when it comes to Israel, the president has too much of a far-left leaning, is too sensitive to the Muslim world and the Palestinian needs, and has articulated the issues underlying the Israeli-Palestinian struggle in Palestinian terms rather than Israeli terms. And that what the president has not said is, Palestinians, if you want American support, if you want America to be even-handed, the first thing you must do is create an even playing field and accept the right of Israel to exist, and then we, the Americans, will do everything we can to bring some form of peace to both you and Israel. And there are American Jews who feel that that hasn't happened because of a specific orientation of the president and the people around him. And I thought maybe this meeting between the president's staff and 15, and I meant no disrespect, I really was not suggesting that any of the rabbis you chose, Jack, would be blinded by the White House spotlight. What I was saying was that it's very important that I believe the people who were there make it clear that they are messengers from the Jewish community, and they come back and bring the message. But Efrem, you understand everything I'm saying about what concerns many American Jews. And my last question for you is, did you leave these two meetings any more comfortable about that specific issue than before these two meetings occurred?
It's an excellent question, and my answer is I left minimally more comfortable. And what I mean by that is, as I sat in that Roosevelt room of the White House with our wonderful hosts, it occurred to me that essentially they believe many of the same policies as segments of the Israeli government, whom we would never challenge their love for Israel. And so it's possible for people to be committed and have love for Israel and yet fundamentally disagree. So again, I am among those who are worried. To me, some of the policies have potentially catastrophic results. To me, some of the policies are delusional in terms of partners who do not yet exist. But it's possible to disagree about the policies vehemently and strongly, and yet not to support, again, this narrative that paints people as anti-Israel or anti-Semitic or even this terribly derogatory self-hating Jew. And to me, that's one of the conclusions I left the White House, that I can fundamentally disagree, that I will work hard and work hard within my community to continue to share a message, whether we are invited or we are sending the message strongly of what our position is, but I am committed to make sure that the message remains about policies and not people.
Efrem Goldberg, you speak beautifully. I am sorry we have not met in person before, so I look forward to that. And I thank you for giving me a moment of
My pleasure. Anytime you're in Boca, we'd love to host.
I will, believe me, I will look forward to it. Jack, I want to conclude with you. Again, you had a hand in putting this together. I wish you would speak to why you think it has got, these meetings have generated so little mention in the mainstream media, whether it's the Times or CNN or anywhere. And then I want you to make a closing comment about what you think the good of these two meetings really has been and where you hope they go from here.
Okay, so we were all a little taken aback when we arrived at the first meeting, and Rahm said to us, this is not a one-time thing. We want to have you back in a month to evaluate how we've been doing in highlighting the policies of the administration in a better way. He said, what I ask you in the meantime is that you be discreet in what you talk about, so that we are not talking in the press past each other about what was and wasn't said at this meeting. When the second meeting was scheduled, I asked Rahm, both by email and in front of the group, if we were permitted to talk about the fact of the two meetings and what went on at both meetings, and the answer was yes, with the exception of, I think I'm correct in saying, two pieces of information that we were given as illustration of a larger issue that were confidential, and if we revealed them honestly, it might serve the interest of the First Amendment, but it would not serve the interest of the State of Israel.
Okay.
All right? So we had a great conversation,
And I'm sorry, is that why? I'm sorry, Jack. Is that why you believe this has not received coverage in the New York Times or on CNN?
No, the reason I think it hasn't received coverage in the New York Times, honestly, Mark, is because we left the White House at 5 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. And because of my loyalty to the Anglo-Jewish press, the first call that I made to the press was to my local Jewish newspaper, and then I spoke to the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. And by the time they got it out, it was almost Shabbos, and I think that for good reason, none of the rabbis was available to talk to anybody on the New York Times or CNN or anything in the interim, and that's why this is circulated mostly in the Jewish press. Is this a huge story on CNN? Rabbis go to White House? I don't know. But I think the message is reaching the community it's meant to reach, which is the American Jewish community.
Okay, and are there other meetings scheduled?
I was asked to stay in touch with the rabbis, but it is pretty clear that we're not coming back to the White House the way we did the past 4 weeks.
Okay, and if you had to give me now Jack Moline's bottom line, what was the most positive thing to come out of this for you?
The most positive thing actually came out very much at the end, where the very question about whether Mr. Emanuel, Ambassador Oren, and Mr. Shapiro were sort of house Jews, which came about as a question about whether the president felt Israel in his kishkas, whether it was an intellectual commitment that he had or whether he really felt Israel in his kishkas. And I don't remember whether it was Rahm or Dan or Dennis who said, you're looking at three guys who had to answer that question before they signed on, and if the answer hadn't been yes, he feels it in his bones, none of the three of us would be here. And I think that was the most important thing that came out because, as Efrem said, we're going to have differences on policy. But as long as we understand that these are differences among people who are committed to the same thing, which is a safe, secure, and Jewish state of Israel, then those arguments are, as we say in the tradition, l'shem shamayim. They're for the sake of heaven, and not on a matter of the fundamental orientation of United States foreign policy.
Jack, I love you very much. I have enormous regard for what you do. Thank you for going out of your way to give me some time on a very difficult rabbinic day for you. It was wonderful speaking to you and to Efrem. I wish both of you kol tuva hatzlacha, and I look forward to other opportunities to talking to you. Thank you, Jack.
Thanks, and keep asking those tough questions.
Thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Mark.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And those were the thoughts of Rabbi Jack Moline, Rabbi of Agudas Achim in Congregation Alexandria, Virginia, which is right outside of Washington, D.C., and Rabbi Efrem Goldberg, who's the Orthodox rabbi of Boca Raton Synagogue in Boca Raton, Florida. Two of the 15 rabbis who were present for two meetings at the White House with Rahm Emanuel, Dennis Ross, Susan Scher, and other administration officials. So, as always, I ask you, what's your sense of all this? You heard Jack, you heard Efrem. How do you react to the substance that they described occurred at these meetings? You know how much I appreciate your emails, your letters. Please be in touch with me this week. I look forward to hearing from many of you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.